Hello everybody, I'm Jake Shaw, your host, and today I'm talking to Geoff Hudson-Searle of IBEM and Mark Herbert from New Paradigms LLC on the subject of trust and how it improves things in general, but especially in business and negotiation. Mark, you've done a lot of work in social enterprises and things like that, where you're dealing with people who haven't had much sort of equity in in any kind of trade negotiation. So, how do you actually roll some trust into those kind of relationships?
My approach there, Jake, is that trust is the international currency. And when you can't provide people with equity in economic terms, what you can provide them with is equity in terms of a sense of security, a sense of integrity, a sense that their leadership is going to say what they do and then do what they say. And and to recognize that when these people are putting their trust in you, and in many cases, the people I'm working with now are at the less privileged end of the spectrum. That's very important to them that they have a sense of that their leadership is going to look to their interest and to recognize that there are things that are swirling about that are probably beyond their comprehension and control. And so that's a big one is do you say what you're going to do and to do what you say is I preface organizations I work with by saying I'm gonna make four commitments to you as your leader. The first commitment I'm going to make to you is that I'm going to treat you with respect. That respect for you has nothing to do with your social economic status. It has to do with your personhood. The second thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to be ensure that if we work together, that my expectations for you are going to be clear. The third thing I'm going to do is I'm going to operate in an environment that where if my expectations are not being met, I'm going to give you feedback and give you a chance to address that. And the fourth thing that I'm going to do is within my power, within my means, I'm going to treat you equitably. Equitably doesn't mean you're going to have a stake or you're going to be a shareholder, but it means I'm going to pay you fairly, given what I have available. And I found that that's very powerful for people that when you commit to those things and you actually execute on this, Jake, it translates pretty well for people saying if you can do those four things, okay, I can sign up to that. Okay, those are four things that I can sign up to. But I'm also very clear with them and saying, as your leader, those are the only four things I can guarantee you. I cannot guarantee you lifetime security. I can't guarantee you wealth. I can't guarantee you happiness or anything like that. But I can aspire to do those things. So that's the thing. It's interesting. You were mentioning the situation of being foreigners. Being in the West, it kind of reminded me that out here in the wild, wild West, we were very much a trust-based environment. Much of this economy initially was agrarian or cattle ranches. And I remember trying to explain to people from the East Coast that when 100,000 head of cattle would change hands over a handshake. And they'd say, well, how does the guy know he got 100,000 cows? I said, well, because the guy told him he had 100,000 cows. It might have been, 999, thousand. There might be short one or over one, but his integrity was there trading on your word when you're out there and you're geographically isolated and you rely on each other, you do not want to be associated with being somebody that cannot be trusted. That your word is not good. It's your survival isn't long if people say that you are someone who cannot be trusted. So that integrity thing was a huge deal. The whole handshake deal, and I'm kind of saddened that we've lost some of that. That just says that to tease a little bit, when Shakespeare said "kill all the lawyers," he wasn't wrong. Maybe we should just maim them, but it's a case of where we hide behind those things in terms of legalities and niceties and things like that. Versus I made a commitment to you, and I'm going to follow through on that commitment. And if for something unforeseen I can't, you will hear that from me. Okay, you won't hear that from a different source.
But you say about lawyers, when you trust somebody, you're actually committing to an act of sharing risk, whereas a
Right.
lawyer is in the business of mitigating risk, so reducing risk
Right.
to its smallest and most acceptable level, whereas person-to-person trust is about we will share this risk together.
Yes, it's interesting, Jake. Both my brothers are attorneys, and my older brother's been practicing for 50 years now. And he said, word of thumb is the longer the contract, the less trust between the parties. Okay, is if you have to have that many pages signed up by that many people, that tells you going into it, be cautious. Okay, if the document starts to resemble the Old Testament, okay, be concerned.
Well, of course, Factory Records, led by not Tony Smith. I'll have to edit this, whatever his name is. But anyway, when he signed a contract with Happy Mondays, the band, it was actually signed on a restaurant napkin in a back of a transit van with his own blood.
That's a statement.
Well, it's legendary, at least. But the band Happy Mondays actually ended up, I think, bankrupting Factory Records. But it was a great ride whilst they were in it. So I suppose there has to be some sort of discussion about the circumstances in which you make your trust and you sign your contract. So perhaps the back of a transit van and outside the PSV club in Manchester at 2 o'clock in the morning in your own blood doesn't bode well. Geoff, talking about trust, you obviously, you and Mark obviously have got a long history together, working together, and you're about as Englishman as they get, especially with your suits. And Mark's from way out west. You've got friendship to base your trust on. So how do you get trust to work in a non-friendship based relationship?
Well, I would say that if we look at our relationship together, which probably spans over possibly 12, 15 years now. I mean, we started off, in the modern way, the internet. We shared a lot of thought leadership together. As Mark said, the international, when he talked about the international currency is trust. I would say that trust, in society, is the glue that keeps relationships, and so forth. So when we look at trust as the glue, as it were, Mark and I have become very close, and our families have become very close, on the basis that we not just had commonality, but we trust each other, we respect each other. Mark talked about integrity, and I listen to Mark. Mark listens to me. We understand each other. We have an ability to communicate together at all levels, and I think that brings purpose, and I think it brings trust to a central place in our relationship. And so, if Mark asks me to do something, he hasn't got to ask me twice, right? And I think that, and equally, if I ask Mark to do something, and when Mark says the word yes, I know it's going to happen. I know it's going to be done. So I think in a world where we're seeing mistrust in places like government, geopolitically, in business, and also in at home with families, and not a lot of rest, with regards to trust. I think we're in a position now where we need to regain trust and build trust to build a better future. And there are plenty of examples of unethical behavior. We start looking at the in history, the Enrons of today, and so forth. But we've got to, I believe, we need to make a step change, and I think that it's leadership that needs to now step up and start addressing the issue of trust. Because if we are to unite, and if we are to do more in society and in commerce and in business and in government, I see we have to have trust at a central position.
So we've talked a little bit about different trust in different places. Well, trust can mean different things in different places. So, for instance, let's talk about we're in this global situation. We are talking to each other as we speak over many thousands of miles. There are different cultural indicators of trust and how you can trust people. I mean, a joke I often tell my American colleagues, not unlike yourself, Mark, is that Americans don't actually. British people believe Americans understand because they speak English, but actually, Americans are Germans who speak English, and so therefore the understanding behind the words is different. So and
Context.
so it's that when as it's often been said, the way the British do business is slow, slow, quick, quick, slow, whereas the Americans go quick, 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 slow, 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 and you've got that essential dichotomy, and yet we can get trust, and I've seen it many, many times. So, how do you overcome? But starting with you, Mark, how does one?
Are you recording?
Yeah, absolutely. How does one overcome international trust in the sense of different cultures? How do you do that?
What I have attempted to do, Jake, is to try to appreciate things from their perspective and to indicate, this is my perspective. I'm coming from it, but to be very clear about that. That if there's something I'm saying or something that I am doing that is uncomfortable or that you don't understand or that is nuanced, part of that trust relationship is to make me aware of that and vice versa. I remember an experience I had that was a very interesting one where I got recruited to go down and do a leadership program on the island of Grenada. And the Grenada does not have a great history with the United States. So I walk into this room with a colleague who had recruited me, and I recognize I am the only person who is not of color. And I'm an American. And I'm going to be spending the next 5 days with this group talking about leadership and about leadership models. And so what I spent a lot of time initially was listening about their cultural perspectives. I had a great experience at the end of it where two young women, one was the director of marketing, the other was the director of HR, took me for a drive around the island because they wanted me to see more Grenada than just my hotel. And they shared with me that we were interested in some of American ideas, but we don't want to be Americanized. And they said, we really appreciate you did not talk at us, you talked to us. And that when you asked, well, this is how we do things. How do you do things here? How would you approach this? And so you were genuine and open in terms of, this is the hows and the whys. Grenada was probably one of the most polite cultures I've ever been in. It was such a great experience. There's a university there which has a distinction. There's a medical school and a veterinary school, which are the only accredited medical and veterinary schools that are accredited by the American Medical Association, American Veterinary Association outside of the continental United States. And watching the American students, how polite they were in terms of interacting with everybody. It was just such a nice thing. But that thing of where they're like the Asians, they're too polite to tell you when you're making an ass of yourself. It's a case of where, we don't get loud. We don't do things. We're not boorish. We're not going to point that out to you. We're just going to judge you. So that's what I do is go into those situations is try to be aware that, I'm attempting to create a relationship with someone, and I shouldn't assume going into it. I shouldn't assume credibility. I shouldn't assume trust. And and I would say for the most part, Jake, that's worked pretty well for me. Is just acknowledging.
Geoff, so Mark's talked about not assuming things, so actually going in with an almost blank sheet of paper, but also there's the bit where you have to go in with some credibility. So if you're going in completely blank to it, how do you establish your credibility on which the trust can be built?
Jake, I think that's a particularly good question, and I really like what Mark said. I mean, it resonates, definitely resonates. I know. Mark and I have shared a glass of wine talking about his Grenada experiences, which nothing falls short than pure distinction and excellence in what he did, especially with the hierarchals. My experiences on the subject are. And I'd like to talk about a couple of things here. First thing is, I spent 15 years of my life pretty much on a plane, 3 countries every week. And it was most of my life was built around the genesis of trust. When you go to a new culture, you've got to listen. You've got to have a level, a depth of understanding. You've got to be able to communicate once you have that sort of level of understanding that can take the relationship forward. And more importantly, we talked earlier about the glue in everything you do, because you are in a different country on home turf. You have to be respectful with that. Now, I remember a very incredibly large Fortune 100 company used to send me into Asia. We touched on Asia. That's why I thought I'd talk about it on a regular basis. I'd be in Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong in 8 days, and I'd generally average about 15 to 20 meetings, in that period, and I'd do that every 7 weeks. I remember going to Japan with one of the representatives from the FTSE 100 company, and when you arrive at the offices in downtown Tokyo, you will hand your business card over, but the way you hand it over is with their etiquette, i.e. not on the logo, but two corners of the side of the card as it goes over. The secretary or PA will take that card and not even touch the card. It will be effectively taken from all four corners, and it will be sent to the person you're going to see. Now, that in their culture, that is you. You are being transported by the card, not in person, by the card to the person you're going to see. When we finally, went through the ceremonial practice of bowing and respectfulness into the boardroom, the representative that came with me decided in his wisdom, because it was a very large boardroom, glass table, that he was going to fire across the table business cards to 12 Japanese people on one side, and myself, him, and our interpreter on the other side. We had just blown the meeting. Whatever we were looking to achieve that day, it was not going to be achieved. We wasted our time, and it took me months to get that meeting back to where we needed to be, so that I could finally negotiate, agree terms, and set presidency with respect in that culture. So lots of people have talked about Asia. Lots of people have talked about, disposing and destroying the business card. A very old tradition, but in Japan, to me, there's lots of learnings that come from that. In actual fact, in Japan, most of the things you need to agree happen outside of the boardroom. But when you're in the boardroom, integrity, respectfulness, okay, and diligence, and then I talked earlier about that level of understanding and empathy and the genesis of trust around communicating in the right way. But it's also behaving in the right way. Trust to me is a defined outcome of behavior, and that's a particularly useful case in point, really.
There's a lot to be said for just good old-fashioned politeness, as you were alluding to, Mark. The fact that if you actually say please and thank you. Once again, my experience is mostly in the Middle East, and I remember once going to a particular meeting. It was the first time I met a very senior gentleman. And I'd been told that the way that it worked in the Arab world is there was the guy you spoke to, and then there was the old man in the corner of the room who you actually had to impress, and you didn't speak to him. And I was very aware that in Arab cultures, the left hand is unclean. You use it for things. And I happened to be left-handed, so I arrived in this meeting. And to your point about asking people how do you do things, I came in and I made my proper references, and I said thank you so much for seeing me. I really appreciate your time, and I'm here to talk about how I might be able to proceed and prosper in Qatar. And I said, but let me just say, I happen to be left-handed, so please forgive me if I do anything that is offensive. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my left hand behind my back so I don't use it. And the old man in the corner said, oh, don't worry about that. I'm left-handed too. And what I'd managed to do by being very honest and being very polite is I'd managed to leapfrog 3 meetings, because I'd managed to then have a conversation with the old man. And the way it goes in the Arab world is there's a lot of tea drunk, or coffee, but mostly tea, usually mint tea. And what will happen is we'll talk about family, and we'll talk about how are you. And in Arab cultures, there's also quite a lot of silence in the conversation. You know, you've often quite often you'll sit there for some seconds whilst everybody looking at each other. Usually the old man will be sitting in the corner smiling and nodding. And then they'll repeat a question. They'll say, well, how are you? He says, well, I'm very well, thank you for asking. And then there'll be more silence. And then eventually they'll say, well, what can we do to help you? And then you know you've got it, because they're prepared to then talk to you. Because what they're doing is they're sizing you up, seeing who you are. So I genuinely believe politeness, and also, as you said, Mark, you know, the saying that you don't know how things work, and please tell me if I get this wrong, can you help me? You know, it's one of the most powerful expressions you can use, is it? Please, can you help me? And that with some politeness really, really helps to establish trust, I believe. We're just coming to the end here. So, Geoff, Mark, you know, you're seasoned international movers and shakers. If people want to get hold of you, where do they find you first, Mark?
Available through my website at any time, www.newparadigmsllc.com. Email address is mark, M-A-R-K, at newparadigmsllc.com. I try to be pretty good about responding to people via my, emails and stuff like that. I'm on LinkedIn, various other sites. So, those are always great ways to reach out to me and contact me.
And Geoff, apart from the bar of the Institute of Directors, where do people find you?
Well, I'm definitely not at the Institute of Directors at the moment due to the lockdown. Obviously from the main website, www.ib-em.com is the main domain site, as Mark said. I'm also, as with Mark, I'm on LinkedIn. I have a blog site which is regularly right around thought leadership on www.freedomafterthesharks.com, and obviously from that is the main access site to all of the other areas. It might be worth mentioning that Mark and I are also embarking on a venture to actually go into depth on trust in a greater level, and we will be releasing a new book. I hope that we will be in publication and on the shelves, hopefully, for 2022. But we may be lucky in 2021, depending on how fast we can expedite certain things. But we're fascinated in this collaboration. We're fascinated in the subject, and I think it'll be a tremendous read for all readers and viewers.
Gentlemen, Geoff Hudson-Searle, Mark Herbert, thank you very much.